Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. Ryan is a family man, first and foremost, but he's also a pastor, publisher, and serial entrepreneur. This podcast will help you think, work, and create like never before.
Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. This is Ryan Frank, and thank you so much for tuning in today. I am so grateful for your time and your attention. If you missed our last episode, we had a wonderful conversation with Pastor Nicole Crank about leading through pain. How do you move from just surviving to thriving? And it really is possible. And today we are continuing that theme as we talk about resilience in leadership. How do you navigate difficult times as you're leading people? I had a wonderful conversation with Nick Blevins. Nick is a pastor, he is a podcaster, he is an author, he is a co-founder of Ministry Boost, he is an active part of the Kids Matter community, and I always love my conversations with Nick. And today we spent the first few minutes of our conversation talking about his new book, The Volunteer Playbook, which is a great book. But then we spent a majority of our time talking about navigating difficult seasons and how do you lead with resilience. And let me just remind you right now as we begin the podcast that you can make it through difficult seasons of life in ministry, in leadership. You've got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, surrounding yourself with the right people, and having the right mindset. And that's what we unpack in today's podcast. I want to thank you once again for tuning in. If you didn't know, I have a new blog over at ryanfrank.com where I am posting articles that are related to the topic of each week's podcast. So if it's been a while since you've been over to ryanfrank.com, please go check it out. Friends, with no further ado, it's time to get this show on the road. Here is my conversation with Nick Blevins. What's up, Nick? Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So how's it going these days in the world of Nick Blevins? You're staying busy?
Yeah.
Family good? Church good? Ministry life
family's
good?
good. Church is good. I mean, it's fall, of course, and my kids, we have 3 kids, age 10, 8, and 4, and they're in different sports and activities and dance. And so, I enjoy, there's some of that that's hard, right? Like you feel like an Uber driver just taking your kids everywhere all week long. So like you get out of the office at church. And then last night was a good example. Like went home just in time to get my son to soccer. By the time we come home, because of soccer and other things with our girls, it's like, I don't know, I think it was like 8:15 or something like that. I was like, there went the whole day,
I know. Isn't that crazy?
But I love it. It's great.
Yeah.
It's a busy time, but things are good at church with some of the other things I'm involved in. I love what I get to do. So it's fun.
I love it. I love it. Beth and I were just talking last night about how busy these kids keep us. You're right. It's not just school, it's stuff after school. And then you have 2 or 3 of them and you're running here and there and playing dad taxi, mom taxi. But it's good. It's a season. It's good. So Nick, take a few minutes. I don't want to assume everybody knows who you are. I know I did a bit of a introduction, a few minutes ago, but will you tell us just about your ministry journey and, all the stuff that you're doing? I know you have a lot of stuff going on. What does day-to-day look like for Nick Blevins? Now I want to talk about, after you're done with that, I want to talk a little about your newest book and then move into the topic today, which I'm super excited about, and that is how to become a resilient leader, because it's easy. We know ministry can be tough, leading can be tough. But boy, how do you build resilience where you can bounce back when it's not easy and whatnot? But Nick, first of all, would you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and what your journeys look like?
Yeah. I grew up attending church ever since I was 2 years old. I say I've been a part of 2 churches my whole life. The one I grew up attending, and then the one we helped start as a church plant 17 years ago, which is pretty cool. Now, I never intended to work for a church. When I was in college, I was going to college for information systems management, thinking I was going to do like computer stuff, project management, worked for a big company called Northrop Grumman, fresh out of college, but was always involved at my church, serving and leading. My wife and I, this was before we were married, but we were leading a few different things together there. It was kind of your, I would say, typical church, where it was a church of probably 300-400 people. We did way too many things. My wife and I were involved in a lot of those things.
Yep.
We're like, too many things are getting too little, resources. And we were part of that. And we just felt like here, we live here north of Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm sure this is true everywhere in the country. But about 20 years ago, we felt like, man, we really need a lot more churches around here for the sheer population in this area. It's not like the South where there's just churches all over. There are a lot of churches, but not enough for the population. And then how many churches could we get? Some new churches too that would help reach people who aren't going to church. That was kind of like a dream. And then, a couple of years later, we hear about a new church coming south to kind of where we are. And, long story short is here we are 17 years later. We helped that start. I was the kids pastor part-time before you could figure out like, okay, how many people are going to be coming? Because this is a church plant and we weren't your typical church plant. So it was larger than most for sure. And then, here we are 17 years later, I lead our next gen staff and our operations team. I love that. Still going strong. Had the same pastor, a lot of the same staff actually that started it, but obviously picked up plenty along the way. Most of our hires have been local. So it's been great. It's been a great season. And do some other things on the side, like you referenced, Kenny and my friend Kevin and I run Ministry Boost to help train church leaders, mostly kids pastors, student pastors, with online courses, resources, coaching, things like that. Yeah. Do a little work with Slingshot to help churches hire staff, and released a book that took me 10 years to write, finally this year. So
congrats.
It's been a ride.
Tell us about the book. I'm super excited about it. Such an important topic, something that we all work with or deal with as church leaders. Tell us about it.
Yeah. It's called The Volunteer Playbook. The whole mindset, originally my idea, and this is what happens when you take 10 years to write a book, right? Like the purpose kind of evolves over time. Yeah. But originally it was like, hey, there's so many things that impact volunteerism and a lot of times we just want the one fix, like give me the one announcement from stage or the one volunteer fair in the lobby or whatever it might be. Yeah. And again, like my church I grew up in, I knew from that experience that it wasn't one thing. We were doing too many things here. We weren't recruiting well strategically here. And so the idea of the book was, could I help all of us identify some of the most important things that impact volunteerism and leading volunteers, and then address them so that you can recruit all the time, every month, all year long. You can train, develop. So I would say probably the thing that people probably would care about most in the book is there's a specific strategy to recruit volunteers, and like you can just run that play and it will help. And then the rest of the book is about leading volunteers. But you know how it is. A lot of times it's about recruiting is like the most important thing. So if you just read the first 3 or 4 chapters or whatever that are about recruiting, that's probably what are going to benefit most people. The rest of it's, okay, let's build a healthy volunteer foundation and culture. Now that you got recruiting going and you're bringing in some new volunteers and stuff like that.
I'm glad you spent so much of the book on that, Nick, because I think a lot of times, especially in the children's ministry community, we complain that we don't have enough volunteers, and we talk about strategies for recruiting. And I don't know if we spend enough time talking about the caring part and the shepherding part or the retention part. But boy, I would think common sense would say that if you care for those leaders and you're not losing as many of them, your need to recruit is going to go down, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I'm like a numbers person. So like, even like retention, I think this is one that most people don't measure. So it's hard to have like a benchmark, but to me, it's like, if you're losing 10% or less of your volunteers every year, that's probably just normal. That's just normal churn, so to speak. Yeah. People have things that come up in their life. If you're losing 28% or something, like if you look back and like, oh, I lost a third, let's say that's probably something else is going on that you should address.
I think you're right. Well, thank you for writing this book. Where do we get it? Amazon, your website? Where's a good spot to get it?
Yeah. Amazon for sure. You can get it paperback, Kindle, audiobook. I had to record that. That was a whole thing. Ryan did not necessarily enjoy that process, but I'm glad it's done. And if you like audio, if you buy the print or the Kindle, you get the audio version free through like a private podcast. So you kind of get a 2 for 1 if you like that. But volunteerplaybook.com has other resources too. There's like a lot of, for every chapter almost has free downloads and things that go with it to help people actually apply what was in the chapter.
I love it. So go check out volunteerplaybook.com. Nick, today we are talking about resilience, and every leader knows that, it takes courage to lead, and you got to have thick skin, and, you're working with people. And so it's going to hurt sometimes. And there's going to be pain that comes with leadership. But great leaders learn how to adapt, change, bounce back. They are resilient. When I talk about resilience in leadership, Nick, what comes to your mind, and why is it so important?
Well, you said some of it, the ability to bounce back. And I think anybody who's been leading for 4 years now definitely has had some resilience from what we went through the last few years in the church and all of that. So I think some of it is, I think as a leader, especially because there's resilience, just being resilient. Like if you aren't necessarily leading a team, how are you managing? How are you responding? How are you dealing with what life is hitting you with? There's that. And then as a leader, it's even different because now you're leading people too. And I think as a leader, part of it is, how can I always have a bigger perspective than just like the right now? You know what I mean? Like if you're in the valley season and it's tough, how can I know that there's mountaintops ahead? And then I think as Christians, we just have an advantage too, because we know what God's promised. So if we're just being honest and you're in a valley, a lot of times you don't know when or if the next mountaintop moment is there.
That's a good point.
But as a Christian, you know, it may not be what you want. I think about, I lost a good friend to cancer this year. There was a moment in his journey fighting that for over a year that I'm sure, and for his family too, where it felt like this is there isn't another mountaintop. He's not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
But as a Christian, there is, right? And so that, I think as Christians and as leaders, we can point to that even in, the hardest times, but most of the time there are other mountaintop moments. There is a brighter future ahead, and leaders are the ones that have to see that, believe that, get other people to believe that, and move and work towards it, even while other people might still be kind of stuck in the valley. And it's not that we all don't do that ourselves, and we all have those moments where it's like, we're down on it, whatever it is. It's been too hard. It's been too long in the valley, and things have been hard, and that's ministry, right? I mean, ministry is just full of adversity and crisis, unfortunately. Even if you don't have a big kind of, church-wide crisis, or we had a, worldwide crisis years ago, there's always people in our ministry and in our church that are personally going through things. Mm-hmm. So there's almost always adversity and crisis in ministry. And that is tough. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with my own staff where they just had, 5 different hard conversations with people over the last month. And that's just draining. And it's I don't know if I want to keep doing this. You know what I mean? I didn't get into ministry to have this every week, and you feel like your tank's just getting emptied or whatever. And, but fortunately they've had this kind of mindset, and push through. And the thing that I always think about is they've been so helpful in serving those people. And some of them, if it's hard, sometimes those people don't stick around, right? If it's a conflict and they don't get what they want. And then sometimes they do. Yeah. So it doesn't always work the way you want, but I'm proud of our team when they're faithful, in those moments.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a minute, that emotional strength that you've got to have to be resilient, because it is tough. And, there are so many things about leading people and being in ministry that bring joy, so many things that you just look back on and they're great. But then, like you said, working with staff on difficult conversations, working through church politics or drama, or, tension in a team. Any thoughts on how do you really manage your emotions well so that you can not get burnout, not be exhausted, not be ready to throw in the towel, but keep moving forward with resilience? Thought around that?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned over the years from other mentors that we've had, I feel so I think sometimes there's a tendency to say, especially with emotions, depending on how you're wired, maybe push those down. This can't be an emotional decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I understand that. I would agree with that. In fact, people that know me well would joke that I don't have many emotions, and that's not totally true. But, it's just, what are those emotions? How do they play out? How do I let my emotions drive me? We're all different that way. And so, but I don't think pushing it down is the answer. I think, in fact, I think a lot of, like, I think of what Brene Brown writes about, a lot of what we probably haven't done but should is be more open and vulnerable about those things.
Yeah.
Be willing to say, like, if Ryan, you and I had a conflict, I'm not just talking about what I think or what my opinion is, but I'd even say how it made me feel. Like, Ryan, hey, when you did this, it made me feel like you didn't care about my ministry or whatever. And we don't like to say those things because that is a vulnerable moment, because then you could, if if it wasn't healthy, that could get turned around and abused. So I think being able to address and be open about the emotions, like, what are we feeling? I think some of it's like, it helps us. Like, we don't even know exactly what we're feeling. You ever, a friend of mine, Will Hutcherson, and Dr. Chenway wrote a book called Seen, and I'm reaching on my desk right now for this. And one of the things they put out with the book was this feelings wheel.
Okay.
I don't know how well the camera will show it here, but it's like the center has 6 emotions, and then out from that you can get more specific. So, like, here's mad, but am I offended, aggressive, frustrated, angry, hateful, let down? Like, there's that, and then there's a whole other level, skeptical. And it's like, I think, the whole point is, how do you get a little bit more specific about what you're feeling? Yes. Because that'll help you address it. Because just being mad but not knowing why you're mad. So I think being able to talk about that, seeing a counselor, I think is important. I think in church world and a lot of places, we just don't address a lot of these things. So it just either gets swept under the rug.
Isn't that true?
Or hiding our own emotions. Yeah, nobody wants to have those conversations are not fun. We literally just talked about this with our all staff at our church yesterday, because we had a couple moments, one this past weekend, and then one a couple weekends ago, where boldness was required. And one of our staff leaders, our executive pastor, did a good job of being bold. Yeah. And that's awkward. And like, as he walks through the encounter, it's like, oh, that doesn't feel good. And oh, that's weird. Yeah. But it's what was needed. And I think for him, emotionally, it's kind of like, how do I do what's right, but not because of an emotion? Yeah. Right. Like, this is the best thing here. And so he did a great job of that. And I think the rest of us on staff got to, learn from how he handled it.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, that's so good. Let's stay on this topic for just a minute of our emotions and when things get tough. We all have had times where, we feel like we're going to burn out. We've had people come to us, hey, I'm burning out. Of course, we've had volunteers, people, I'm burnt out, I need a break. But then I think of when we look in our own hearts and lives, there have been times where maybe we haven't like extreme burnout, but we feel that creeping up. Will you talk to us about how to not only identify burnout, because I think that's easy, but what do we do to really prevent burnout, so that we can stay resilient and that we can keep leading even when it's not easy?
Yeah, I think, and by the way, you said, I think burnout is easy to identify, and I would agree with some of that. One of the things I heard, though, that I don't think I would have known as an identifier was, like, you work harder but get less done. Like, you're less productive.
Boy, that's true.
And I think I've been there before. Yeah, we're like, and I think I heard that was more like, you're not fully burnt out yet, but you're on the way. Where it's like, you can have your normal week, your normal day, but somehow it's not getting as much done as you used to.
I haven't thought about that, but I could see that as being a sign of burnout. You're right. You show up and you go through the motions, but really, what are you getting done? Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm pretty sure I heard that from Carey Nieuwhof and his just in talking about it, but his book At Your Best is a good resource for that. And I had been, I've been there before, where it's like, I feel like I don't know where that is in the stages of burnout. I don't think it's like completely burnt out, especially when I hear Carey talk about his journey, but it feels like you're close. And I think part of it is, if I hadn't heard that, I wouldn't even have known that that's why I wasn't as productive. I don't know how everybody else is wired, but in my mind, it'd have been like, oh, I just got to work harder, or I'm about not being efficient enough. You know what I mean? Like, where's my time management and productivity tips and hacks and things like that. Yeah. So that was one helpful sign for me. But I think a huge part of it is, are we honoring a Sabbath day? Like, do you get disconnected? What's your time with Jesus like? Do you have a devotional? Our youth pastor went to a great like kind of week-long in the wilderness thing with other youth pastors recently. And he said one of the guys there that's been a pastor forever, just retired, would walk around and talk to all the student pastors and introduce himself and, hey, what's your name, where you from, kind of thing. And then pretty like early on in the conversation, he would say, what are you reading in the Bible? And his point when he spoke later in the week was that he felt like half of them couldn't even say because they probably weren't, they lost that. And we've all been there, I think. Or I know I've been there, where
100%.
And even if your job requires being in the Bible, if you're a pastor and you're preaching every week, or your student pastor, your kids pastor delivering a message, that's not the same too as your time with God and prayer and reading the Bible, just connecting. And so I think that's huge. How do you do that? This is one of those things, Ryan, where like, I want to do that every day, but I don't do that well. So for me, it's like, can I do that 5 days a week? And like, that's my target. Cause part of me is like, I've been there where you set up like the perfect thing and then you don't hit it. And then you do less. That's with true. All kinds of things. And so for me, it's like, let's make this the goal. I would love to absolutely do more than that. What does Sabbath look like? Do I have hobbies, things where, nowadays with my kids and all the things that we talked about they're doing, I do love a lot of that. So like we'll have Saturdays, where it's like, man, it feels like Saturday was 8 hours of driving around to different sports and activities for the kids. And there's this part of it that's tiring, but, I don't think about church and ministry or ministry boost or whatever. I'm not on my phone as much because we're sitting at games, talking with other people. We can come home at night and play games together as a family or watch a movie. And there's just something about like that time not focused on everything else that kind of refills your cup, because ministry will empty it that week.
100%.
That's like just how it works. So like, where do you get to refill it up? So for me, that's probably, how I try to combat burnout. And I remember there was a season a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago now, where I think it was a summer, and I slept more than I ever did. And I think some of that was recuperation from close to burnout. You know what I mean? Like if I look back on that, it was about 3 months of, which was great. Nothing like getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep more regularly. When I would say that's probably not my norm. My norm is probably 7.5. Yeah. And I think that helped. I think that, that's a simple thing, but I think that helped.
Yeah. I love that, because I think so much of burnout, somebody told me one time, Nick, that when someone comes to you and says they're feeling burnout, what they're really saying is their needs in their life that aren't being met. And if it's not necessarily that it's not those 4th and 5th graders that they've been teaching for 5 years that's burning them out. There's some need, there's something going on in their life that's not being met. And if I can be self-aware enough to recognize that in my life, that when I start feeling burnout, maybe it's a physical need, maybe it's things aren't right at home with my wife, maybe, my walk with the Lord isn't what it needs to be. But at the end of the day, you've got to take care of yourself. And I love those practical things that you shared, Nick, like getting into the scripture and making sure that you get enough sleep and surrounding yourself. For me, Nick, it's usually the people that I surround myself with is huge. If I surround myself with negative people, I'm going to find myself having a negative mindset. But if I surround myself with positive people that, are walking with the Lord and, believing God for big things, it's crazy how that rubs off on me. Do you find that true in your life?
Oh yeah, for sure. And, you just mentioned something else that I probably should mention because it's been so helpful to me. So like I said, I've been to 2 churches my whole life. The one I grew up in, the one that I'm on staff with now. My youth pastor is still a pastor in the area. So like we get together, him and me and another friend of mine that was part of the youth ministry then. And that's like a life-giving thing, like quarterly roughly, we have lunch together, and there's just so much power in that. He's known me and my wife since we were middle schoolers. Like it's almost like it's my free counselor in some ways, but he's my friend, my mentor. But the other thing that I fell into that has just been great is over the last, I guess, like almost 15 years, I've been able to connect with other ministry leaders, mostly through conferences, and developed friendships. And I would say who the groups are and how tight we've been has ebbed and flowed. In fact, just literally this morning, we use an app, Marco Polo. I call it Snapchat for old people, but like video message back and forth. And that's usually how we've always stayed connected. Our groups of friends. And this morning, literally me and one of my good friends who we're still connected with. And then another friend who we haven't seen in a while. We're sort of lamenting the fact that our old group of there was probably 10 to 12 of us that were all in similar roles in a church and would see each other a couple times a year and would talk on Marco Polo. And we've had moments where we've spent 3 hours listening to each other talk about how are things in your life and let's pray for you and what's hard. And man, it's just so good. It's one of those things, like, especially being wired the way I am, I don't know that I ever would have said, I need that. Yeah. And then you get it for however many years and you're like, oh man, I don't know how I did that without that. I mean, I could jump on Marco Polo right now after this podcast and say whatever, talk about what's hard in ministry, what's going on in life. And man, it's a great safe place. It's not somebody in my church where, that could be weird if the thing I'm processing has to deal with church. And so I'd say, man, find that. Where can you connect with ministry leaders? It's hard. You got to work at it, but get in some kind of intentional community. Is it a monthly Zoom call, but you're also on a Marco Polo app or something like that, where you can kind of communicate back and forth, because there's so much power in being able to have conversations with people who understand, because they're in a similar role to you, but they're removed, right? So you don't have to worry about that. And then some of it's just fun doing life too, our friend that we're talking to this morning, when I get off this call, I'll probably ask about, hey, how's it going with the kids you're fostering? That just like what's going on there, and give me an update. And man, that's been powerful. It is hard to get. I feel like a lot of ministry leaders do this alone, and I understand why, because I've been there. Yeah. But try to find that community of people, like-minded. Doesn't matter where you're located. It could be local, but it doesn't have to be. I haven't had that. True. And things will change. Well, I mean, literally in our group that I'm talking about, at one point, I think there was like 14 of us. Only 2 of us still do the same job that we were doing. Isn't that something else? 5 years ago or whatever. Yeah. So you guys it's crazy. So in some ways that we are. It's me and one other person. And that's hard because that's not the same. Like, we don't have that same community we have. That's okay. Build something a little different, make new connections, and 100%. And do it over again. Yeah. I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the people that I would say are my closest friends, and none of them live close by. I mean, honestly. And so, yeah, it would be great. I wish they lived close by and we could get lunch or coffee, but it is possible to have those good connections, even from a distance. The important thing is recognize your need for it and then do something about it. God, listen to me, podcast listeners. I know this is close to Nick's heart and mind as well as mine. And that is, God never intended for you to go at this alone. Please, don't go at it alone. Surround yourself with other people. As Nick said, it truly is a game changer. And years back, you'll look back and realize, wow, this has been so good. I mean, we see this through the pages of the scripture. And, you talk to people with gray hair that have been leading with success, and they'll tell you the people that you surround yourself with is so important. Nick, is there anything, when we think about going through tough times and getting through it, is there anything you wish you could go back and tell yourself when you were maybe 20, 22 years old, just getting started, that you've learned now as what are you, 52? As a 52-year-old man, Nick? No, you're not 52 yet. Not 52, but definitely have plenty of years to look back on. Yeah, well, what's something you wish you'd go back and tell yourself? Well, definitely not doing it alone would be a huge one, right? Like, and some of that's a personality thing. Like, I am definitely a little bit more of an introvert. I joke that I like play an extrovert in settings like this or at a conference or whatever. And I'm near the middle. I'm like an extreme. My wife is an extreme introvert, so I'm not quite there, but it'd be easy the way I am wired to kind of go at it alone and think that that's, how to handle that. So that would be certainly one. I would encourage somebody to do this in community. I think, I'd also say, you're not going to get it right every time. And so depending on how you're wired, if that matters a lot, if you're more of a perfectionist type, I don't know if people use the Enneagram a lot. I think of Enneagram 1s, that's get all those things right. You can in ministry. I mean, ministry is just messy. I mean, it's probably true in all of life, but ministry makes that even more difficult. And so know that you're kind of going to get it wrong so you can forgive yourself. I mean, there's a lot of things in church leadership where we only control 12%, but in our mind, we control 90. And then something doesn't work out. And it's like, oh man, I should have done that. And meanwhile, God's like, no, I'm the one over here controlling 90. I'm allowing you to be involved at this level.
That is so true.
And it's going to go this way for some reason we don't know. And yet, we feel terrible about it. I think of like, this has been, obviously this is multiple years removed now, but my heart broke for all the lead pastors who felt bad about how their churches decreased in size through the pandemic. And it's like, you have zero to do with that. Like, be faithful. We can only be faithful with the inputs. We don't control the outputs.
Yeah.
And leave the rest of that to God. And the same thing can be with kids ministry and student ministry. I've seen it now with high school ministry, because that's still affected attendance wise. Most churches are still affected attendance wise. And so it's like, how do you let that go and recognize the little bit you do control, be faithful with that, and find a way to rest well in that, rest well in that, and not get hung up on the output. That's like, it's still not the numbers that we want, or the attendance or volunteers or whatever.
Yeah. Such good advice. Thank you, Nick. Boys, as we wrap up the podcast, I always like to end with two questions. First, I'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite Bible story, and what makes it your favorite?
It would be Joseph, Old Testament, because of that line. Well, because of him and his faith, but there's that line that comes up over and over again, and God was with Joseph. And you get it like when he's in prison, you get it when like he's the leader. God's always with Joseph. But it's like this, I love that story because it feels like you're getting like the actual story on the ground. And then every now and then you get this higher picture little insert, and God was with Joseph. It's like you get the on the ground view, and then you get the God view every now and then. You get a little perspective of where God is in it. But what I love about that story is Joseph's faith, and his actions are the same the whole time. You know what I mean? It's like he really believed God was with him. Like, the writer is saying God was with Joseph, and Joseph seemed to really believe that, and he lived it. Now I'm nothing. I wish I was a lot more like that. So I think part of the reason I love that story is like, I am not as nearly as good at always living like God is with me, but Joseph was. And so I just take inspiration from that.
Yeah. And it'd be great to meet Joseph in heaven one day. I mean, what an amazing story.
Oh, so many, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and then part of it you don't exactly get a lot in the story of, okay, what helped you stay true?
That's true.
What was it like? How much did you doubt? Like, you know what I mean? Where did you mess up in some other ways that we don't know because it's not in the story?
Yeah, we don't read about them, do we?
No, so some of that's missing. So that would be a lot of fun. Give me some insight here into like more of the detail there. But that's the other thing I love about the story too, is it's a long period of time.
It is.
This is not even just one account or whatever. You see a life, which is really cool.
100%. All right. Final question, Nick. What's something big that Nick's working on right now?
The Multiply Ministry Conference online we have coming up November 8th and 9th. Ryan, you did a main session last time we did it, which was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We took off. Kidman Academy is going to be a sponsor, which will be a lot of fun. So definitely working on that. And that's basically the same idea that we did 2 years ago, just an online conference to help church leaders lead volunteers. But the other big thing is a course on a strategy to partner with parents. I kind of put a poll in one of our Facebook groups. Like, we always feel like we're working on things. I love working on new things to help church leaders. So I think I put in like, here's 6 things that we're thinking about or talking about, what is, and please vote, what would be the most helpful to you. And this idea of a course on partnering with parents was number 1, and I wanted to do it anyway. So that I'll start working on, but that's getting created from scratch. So unlike Multiply Ministry, where we're just running it back again, this has to be created completely from scratch. And I've got all the thoughts in my head and ideas, and we certainly do not. I don't think any church does this well enough, right? This is one of those things where, like, if you feel like if your church is doing it at a D level, you probably feel pretty good. Like an A plus might be a mirage, because like you just feel like, you know what I mean? So that's 100%. The tension I'll wrestle with, is like, it's going to be weird to try to help people do something that even I don't feel like our church ever does as well as I want. But I hopefully can share some practical ideas.
I love it. Where can we learn more about Multiply Ministry event?
Multiplyministry.org. It's free. We have main session speakers. It's all about empowering volunteers to multiply your ministry impact. So kind of going back to some of the principles, even in the volunteer playbook book, like the whole point is, how can we lead volunteers in a way that, we can do more? And because we're not doing it, volunteers are also doing that with us, and just expand our impact as a church, which I just think is so important.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Nick, thank you so much. Podcast listeners, go check out Nick's book, volunteerplaybook.com. This would be a must read if you're in children's family youth ministry and you are tasked with leading a volunteer team. You need to go check it out. And then, I would love for you to be a part of the next event, multiplyministry.org, coming up November 8th and 9th, right?
Yep, you got it.
Yeah,
so a couple hours live each day, and some time to watch these on-demand breakout videos.
Yeah, love it. And we're excited to partner with you on this, Nick. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time. I hope that y'all are leaving the podcast today with a renewed passion and desire to be a resilient leader. You can make it through even the tough seasons. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure that you're walking with the Lord, that you're surrounding yourself with the right people. God will help you get there. Nick, thanks again. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Ryan.
This episode of the Ryan Frank Podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more conversations to help you stay on the leading edge. And if you like what you've heard, please rate this podcast with 5 stars. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you next time.